The message this week, I have given it the title, Right Between the Eyes. And I say it's a giant story. Now, the story involves a young man whose chief responsibility was to tend to a flock of sheep that belonged to his father. But it was during this time that he was busy tending to the sheep that much of the character and the spiritual climate of this young man was developed. His name was David. And David was not only a tender of sheep, but he was also a musician. He played the harp. And from what is described in Scriptures, we find this in the 17th chapter of 1 Samuel. A servant of King Saul, who was the king of Israel at that time, who was in need of someone to come and play the harp to be able to deal with an evil spirit that was affecting King Saul. And a servant of Saul said to the king, he says, I know a young man who is skillful and cunning in playing the harp. And he also said that he was also a mighty valiant man and a man of war and prudent in all matters. That was what the servant who knew David and knew of him was given that description to King Saul of this young man. But there was one more thing that this servant said. And I believe that this is the most important thing that he said. He said that the Lord is with him. And I believe that's a powerful statement for anybody to say, hey, I believe that God is with that person. Well, I can speak for myself, and I would say, Lord, I would desire that God be with me. And so, as this young man tending his sheep has now been called to go before the king of Israel to play his harp cunningly and to do it in such a way that the king would have his problems smoothed out. In other words, for a moment of time, the devils that were vexing him would be held at bay. So there would be times when David would be called up to the king's place to go minister with his harp, and then other times he was there in the Judean hills watching over his flock. But I would imagine that if you were a person who was just walking through those hills, you probably heard the sound of a harp and of a young man who with loud voice was praising the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob with all of his heart, just giving everything he had over to praise and giving glory to God. And as I said, these were the years when God was developing something in this young man. This is Pastor Jack King with a gospel on the radio broadcast.